You won't believe what Jasmine Crockett did to Ilhan Omar, completely destroyed her with facts. Did you know one fiery exchange in Congress left even seasoned representatives stunned when Jasmine Crockett turned Ilhan Omar's argument on its head? Tonight, we're breaking down how Representative Jasmine Crockett completely dismantled one of Ilhan Omar's strongest talking points, using nothing but sharp reasoning and undeniable facts. And the most shocking part? It wasn't just a clash of personalities, but of principles, with a twist you won't see coming. Quick challenge. Whose debating style do you think holds more weight? Relentless passion or cool, fact-driven reasoning? Drop your take below before we unpack the real battle of wit. What really happens when fiery rhetoric collides head-on with disciplined data precision? That's exactly what unfolded when Representative Jasmine Crockett squared off against Ilhan Omar. It wasn't just a disagreement over policy. It was two entirely different strategies in motion, and the contrast was impossible to ignore. Omar leaned heavily on passionate declarations, sweeping generalizations, and emotional appeals that resonated with her base. Crockett, by contrast, came into the exchange armed with specific evidence, hard numbers, and calm, lawyerly dismantling of the narrative being presented. Precision against passion. Think about it. In any high-stakes debate, there are essentially two currencies, emotion and proof. Emotion captures an audience in the moment, but proof lingers once the applause fades. Crockett's performance showed that when passion and facts collide, the edge almost always tilts toward the speaker who controls the factual baseline. And here's the kicker. By forcing the conversation away from heated rhetoric and onto measurable evidence, Crockett played on ground Omar wasn't fully prepared to defend. That shift alone unravelled much of the energy Omar relied on. A debate is a lot like building a house. You can decorate the outside with colorful banners, but if the foundation is weak, the structure can't withstand pressure. Crockett's approach wasn't flashy, but it was built on materials that last. She knew how to spot the fault lines and apply pressure until the cracks spread. That's why observers left the room saying she destroyed the argument, though in reality, all she did was highlight weaknesses with undeniable clarity. Here's the takeaway. In conversations, whether in politics, business, or even your personal life, always ask yourself, am I leaning on emotional weight or anchoring myself in verifiable facts? When push comes to shove, evidence prevails. Facts don't flinch. Sometimes the sharpest blows in debate don't come from fiery accusations, but from quiet, well-placed statistics. That was the turning point when Jasmine Crockett confronted Ilhan Omar's framing on U.S. foreign policy. Omar leaned on broad claims about America's role abroad, painting sweeping pictures of humanitarian consequence. Crockett, however, countered not with vague generalities but with precise numbers. Data Omar clearly hadn't anticipated would surface in that exact moment. In an instant, the weight of the discussion shifted. Numbers, silence, noise. Consider how powerful that move really is. When someone lays down statistics with credible sourcing, it forces the audience to stop and recalibrate. Emotions can swirl, but data acts like an anchor. It pulls the conversation back to something measurable, something testable. Crockett specifically cited budgetary allocations, foreign aid percentages, and comparative spending metrics. These weren't random figures. They were tactical, threaded into her rebuttal in a way that exposed the thinness of Omar's argument. And in politics, exposing thinness is a knockout punch. Think of it like a chess match. Omar moved her queen aggressively into the board, commanding attention but leaving an opening. Crockett responded not emotionally, but strategically, with a pawn that cut directly across Omar's assumption. Suddenly, the entire board looked different. The crowd, reporters, even colleagues in the chamber recognized this wasn't just another exchange. It was a fact-driven reversal. The lasting lesson here is simple. In any setting where credibility is on the line, prepare not just to defend your passion, but to anticipate a data-backed counter. If you don't, one well-placed statistic can collapse your whole structure. Crockett showed that a single spreadsheet can carry more weight than a speech. Evidence is endurance. Picture this, a courtroom packed wall to wall, the air thick with anticipation. A lawyer rises, frames a question in a way that assumes guilt, and waits for the witness to stumble. That's how Ilhan Omar structured parts of her exchange. questions and statements loaded with assumptions. But Jasmine Crockett didn't stumble. Instead, she did something subtle but devastating. She redefined the terms of the entire discussion. That move instantly disrupted the momentum Omar was banking on: control the frame or lose the fight. Omar's strategy mirrored classic rhetorical traps, where controlling the language essentially controls the argument. By labeling actions with emotionally charged terms, she attempted to corner Crockett into agreeing with her framing. But Crockett, with her legal background, recognized the snare. Instead of accepting the premise, she calmly reframed. Terms like reckless or inhumane were redirected toward budget realities, foreign policy precedents, and existing congressional commitments. The bait simply didn't work. That reframing had two immediate effects. First, it broke Omar's rhythm, because every rebuttal she had prepared relied on Crockett accepting that initial narrative. And second, it signaled to observers that Crockett wasn't just debating, she was dissecting step by step like a surgeon with a scalpel. The emotional weight shifted to logical clarity, a move that's often underappreciated in heated exchanges. We've all experienced versions of this outside politics. Think of a heated workplace meeting where someone frames a problem negatively. This project is failing because of leadership incompetence. If you accept that frame, you're defending yourself endlessly. If you redefine it, this project faces challenges, but let's review timelines and data. You steer things back to measurable ground. Here's the real-world takeaway. Never fight a battle on someone else's terms. Reframe their assumptions into your strengths. That's not dodging, it's dominating. Every great political clash has that one unforgettable moment, the kind that makes an audience lean forward and whisper, "Wait, did that just happen?" For Jasmine Crockett, that moment came when she pulled out receipts from overlooked congressional records, documents that most viewers, and frankly, even some legislators, never knew existed. It wasn't dramatic in delivery, but the effect was seismic. She didn't just argue against Ilhan Omar's claims, she produced contradictions written in black and white. Receipts always win. Omar had been driving her point with conviction, weaving narratives about funding priorities and humanitarian motives. But Crockett almost casually referred to specific committee votes, past amendments, and budgetary breakdowns. In doing so, she made it clear Omar's rhetoric didn't align with her own legislative footprint. This wasn't just about debating ideas. This was about accountability, about matching words to records. And in politics, nothing erodes credibility faster than inconsistency. The tension in that moment was unmistakable. Crockett wasn't relying on tactical interruptions or fiery comebacks. She was relying on something far more threatening: documentation. Think of it like a courtroom again. An attorney waives a signed contract that contradicts a witness's memory. No matter how passionate the story, the paper in hand speaks louder. The weight of evidence is undeniable. For the watching public, this underscored something powerful. Passion gets headlines, but receipts shape history. If you can trace someone's stance across actual records, you instantly know whether you're witnessing conviction or convenience. And here's the applicable lesson for everyday life. When you're challenging an argument, don't stop at counterpoints. Bring proof. An email thread, a recorded agreement, a documented fact. Arguments fade. Records endure. Crockett reminded everyone that in the arena of truth, silence falls hardest when the receipts appear. What made Jasmine Crockett's rebuttal especially effective wasn't just that she challenged Ilhan Omar. It's that she managed to win the debate on two fronts at once. Omar had chosen to press her case heavily on humanitarian grounds, suggesting that spending or policy shifts could alleviate suffering abroad. It was an emotionally compelling angle. But Crockett didn't stop at questioning feasibility. She did something far sharper. She tied Omar's own humanitarian appeal directly to fiscal responsibility. And suddenly, she wasn't pitting morality against money. She was aligning both. Two victories in one strike. Let's unpack why that was so decisive. In debates, opponents often try to box each other into false dichotomies. You're either compassionate but careless with money, or rational but cold to human needs. By bridging the two arguments, Crockett refused the dichotomy entirely. She showed that humanitarian outcomes and careful budgeting weren't enemies, they were natural allies. That left little ground for Omar to stand on, since her narrative relied on emotion standing in opposition to reason. When those two sides fused, the emotional edge lost its sting. This kind of approach matters beyond politics too. Think of workplace dynamics. Imagine one coworker pushes for a resource-heavy initiative for the good of the team, while another argues for efficiency. A clever strategist blends the two. We can support the team while using resources more wisely, and immediately reshapes the debate. That's exactly what Crockett accomplished in front of both colleagues and viewers. And here's the real key takeaway. The strongest argument is rarely one-dimensional. When you can hold compassion in one hand and pragmatism in the other, you win trust from both camps. Emotion alone is unsustainable, and numbers alone often feel cold. But align them, and you own the room. Every so often, a political exchange does more than score points in the moment. It signals where the game is headed. That's exactly what Jasmine Crockett may have triggered in her public sparring with Ilhan Omar. Analysts were quick to note that her calm, evidence-heavy style isn't just a personal quirk. It could represent the rise of a new wave inside progressive politics. The fact-first progressive style becomes movement. What does that mean? For years, much of the progressive brand has been built around fiery passion, mobilizing with emotion and standing firmly in moral conviction. Those elements certainly energize crowds and dominate social media. But passion without proof has one major weakness: longevity. A meme might go viral, but statistics carry forward into policymaking, negotiations, and long-term credibility. Crockett's exchange reminded both her peers and younger politicians that if you want lasting influence, you can't stop AET slogans. You have to own the data too. It's not unlike what we've seen in sports. Think about a rookie stepping onto the court with fundamentals sharper than veterans. They don't just impress in one game, they establish a style others begin copying. Leaders inside political movements take notice. Already, rising representatives and activists are studying Crockett's method of blending assertiveness with receipts because it's a shield against being dismissed as too emotional while still keeping moral impact intact. Here's why this matters to viewers. Trends in debating styles today often shape platforms tomorrow. If activists adopt more data-grounded advocacy, it could transform not only campaign rhetoric but also legislative results. Facts, linked to convictions, travel farther. The takeaway? Don't just watch the clash for entertainment, pay attention to the method. What Crockett displayed wasn't a one-off. It could be the blueprint for how arguments will be won in the coming decade. One of the most decisive pivots in any debate comes with a fact check. We all know the feeling. One person makes a sweeping claim, it hangs in the air with confidence. And then, bang, someone counters with hard data. That's exactly the moment Jasmine Crockett engineered when Ilhan Omar cited questionable figures about U.S. budget allocations. With steady precision, Crockett corrected her midstream, citing direct Congressional Budget Office (CBO) data. Instantly, the dynamic shifted. Facts are the reset button. Here's why it mattered so much. Omar's credibility rests on her ability to frame issues as moral imperatives backed by evidence. The second that evidence comes into question, the power balance tilts. Crockett didn't have to raise her voice. She didn't even have to embellish her correction, because accuracy carries its own gravity. By leveraging the CBO's most recent numbers, she not only dismantled Omar's claim, but simultaneously positioned herself as the figure more grounded in verifiable truth. We've all seen this dynamic outside of politics too. Perhaps a colleague confidently cites outdated sales data in a meeting, only to have someone quietly produce this quarter's numbers. The room doesn't remember the loud declaration. They remember the correction. And more importantly, they recalibrate trust. Once an audience feels someone is sloppy with facts, even unintentionally, their future statements feel weaker. The practical lesson here is direct. Whenever you're speaking in public, in a debate, or even around a boardroom table, keep your information updated and sourced. Old data gets weaponized quickly, and being off by even a few percentage points can shift perception against you. Crockett's move was surgical, not dramatic, but it left a lasting mark. In the battle of ideas, the most devastating weapon is accuracy delivered at the perfect time. Sometimes the most powerful observations aren't what unfold in front of the camera, but what seasoned analysts say afterwards. Following the Crockett-Omar clash, one political analyst summed it up in a way that cut to the bone. Crockett hit Omar where she didn't expect. Policy receipts, not slogans. Strategy trumps rhetoric. That quote resonated because it crystallized what so many viewers noticed instinctively. Omar came in leaning on meme-worthy lines and moral intensity, expecting Crockett to counter with either defensive rebuttals or equally emotional fire. Instead, Crockett turned the exchange into a fact-driven audit. Suddenly, the debate wasn't about ideals in the abstract, it was about whose narrative matched reality, and as the analyst pointed out, that mismatch can be far more devastating than a heated insult. The strength of analysis like this lies in its ripple effect. When experts frame moments with sharp clarity, their framing often catches on. Social media commentary echoed the same words. Receipts, not slogans. It became the shorthand summary of the event, shaping how the public remembered the clash. In politics, narratives matter just as much as performance. The same is true outside of Capitol Hill. Think about a tense business negotiation. One side may lean heavily on grand promises, while the other quietly produces audited numbers. An outside consultant reviewing the meeting might later remark, "They won by showing facts, not flair." That external framing determines how stakeholders discuss the outcome afterward, and often who they rally behind. Here's the lesson. Never underestimate the power of post-game analysis. If you control not just what happens in the debate, but how it's interpreted by credible voices afterward, you magnify impact. Crockett didn't just win in the exchange, she won in the retelling. For a lot of younger activists and first-time voters watching the Crockett-Omar exchange, the lesson went far beyond a single congressional spat. What they saw was a model of advocacy, a reminder that passion alone may draw attention, but facts are the glue that holds credibility together. In an age where soundbites dominate, Crockett made a case for something refreshingly rare, substance that can actually withstand challenge. Arguments need proof to survive. Think about it. Many young people cut their political teeth online, where debates are won with viral quips or snappy retorts. But when those same approaches are applied offline, in committee rooms, town halls, or policy negotiations, they can fall flat without data to back them. Crockett's method demonstrated a different pathway. Keep your principles sharp, but arm them with evidence. That combination gave activists watching a powerful blueprint. For the grassroots organizer pushing for local change, this was a wake-up call. It's not enough to simply rally a crowd with "we demand justice." You need to cite studies, funding streams, and legislative precedents. Mobilization draws people in, but validation keeps them engaged. Crockett showed that proving your point with documentation doesn't kill momentum, it sustains it. The ripple effect was immediate. Social media threads filled with discussions of how more activists should pull the receipts instead of just delivering slogans. That shift in perception may sound subtle, but over time it could redefine progressive advocacy from being purely emotional to being data-grounded advocacy with moral conviction intact. And here's the takeaway for anyone, activist or not. When you want people to rally with you, don't just show them your passion, show them your proof. That's what creates staying power. Passion sparks the flame, but facts keep it burning. If this breakdown is sparking ideas already, here's your chance to stay ahead. Make sure to subscribe so you don't just catch sound bites, you understand strategies. We unpack not just what politicians say, but how their tactics shift entire conversations, influence campaigns, and even forecast who gains traction in future primaries. And I want to hear from you. Do you think Crockett's evidence-first approach is the future of debates, or will passion always outweigh precision in politics? Your thoughts shape this discussion as much as the facts on the floor. Hit that button, drop your perspective, and let's keep building a community that values depth over noise. Don't just watch the clash. Learn the craft. If you expected fireworks from Jasmine Crockett when clashing with Ilhan Omar, you might have been surprised by her delivery. There was no shouting, no theatrics, no performative pause. It's meant to rile the crowd. Instead, Crockett's voice stayed measured, even restrained. And yet, paradoxically, that restraint made her impact hit harder. The quieter her tone, the sharper the sting. Why does that matter? Because audiences intuitively sense control. When someone raises their voice, it can often feel defensive, as if they're compensating for weakness. But when someone calmly dismantles another's argument point by point without ever breaking composure, it signals mastery. Crockett leaned into that advantage. Every statistic she presented, every reframing she undertook, carried more weight because it arrived without theatrics. It was surgical precision delivered in a whisper instead of a shout. We've seen this dynamic play out in other arenas too. Think of an athlete who doesn't celebrate after scoring, they just jog back down the court. That lack of flash doesn't reduce the power of the point, it amplifies it because it feels inevitable, routine, unshakable. Crockett's cool confidence conveyed the same energy. She wasn't just winning an argument, she was making it feel obvious that Omar's position couldn't stand. The twist here is crucial for anyone trying to persuade. Intensity isn't the same as influence. Sometimes the most effective delivery is steady, patient, deliberate. High volume may grab ears, but calm precision captures trust. The real-world takeaway? When locked in a heated exchange, at work, in relationships, or in politics, don't underestimate the power of composure. A calm demeanor framed with facts doesn't just win the argument, it makes the victory unquestionable. Quiet confidence isn't weakness, it's pure power. One of the easiest traps in a debate is leaning too heavily on repetition. It feels safe, it feels familiar, and sometimes it even feels powerful in the moment. That's exactly where Ilhan Omar stumbled. Instead of adapting to Crockett's fact-based counters, she circled back again and again to the same declarative phrases and humanitarian appeals. The problem? What sounds strong the first time often sounds hollow the third. Repetition without proof is weakness. Omar's insistence on staying in her comfort zone actually gave Crockett more opportunities to strike. Each repeated line left an opening for Crockett to counter with yet another batch of details, figures, or receipts. It was like a boxer telegraphing the same punch. Quicker, sharper opponents can dodge it effortlessly and retaliate. And Crockett did just that, building momentum with each exchange, turning predictability into vulnerability. The audience caught it too. You could almost sense the shift. What initially came across as passion began to register as avoidance. Viewers didn't interpret Omar's repetition as strength or insistence. They read it as failing to engage with Crockett's precision. In politics, perception is everything, and this misstep played directly into Crockett's hands. We've all seen this outside politics as well. Imagine a team member in a business pitch repeating the same slogan while investors press for numbers. What begins as conviction quickly feels like deflection, and once people detect deflection, they stop trusting the argument. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Repeating yourself doesn't reinforce your case if the foundation isn't solid. In fact, it makes the cracks more obvious. The smarter move is to adapt, to introduce new angles, new data, new layers of reasoning. Crockett adapted, Omar didn't, and in debates, adaptability is survival. If there was one hidden advantage that Jasmine Crockett carried into her clash with Ilhan Omar, it was her years practicing law. Legal training doesn't just teach you statutes, it sharpens your ability to spot flawed analogies, unravel faulty premises, and force precision out of vagueness. That's exactly what Crockett deployed in the exchange. While Omar leaned on sweeping comparisons and emotionally charged metaphors, Crockett treated those statements like examination material. Every weak analogy was intercepted, dissected, and reframed. She turned rhetoric into evidence review. This wasn't about being flashy. It was about discipline. Lawyers are trained to listen for the gaps, the almost true statement, the selectively used data point, the overly broad claim dressed up as fact. Crockett's ear for these gaps gave her a clear edge. When Omar tried constructing moral arguments with loose scaffolding, Crockett stepped in and tightened every bolt, grounding the debate in precise terms that couldn't be brushed aside. Suddenly, what sounded persuasive at first began to feel porous. Think of it in everyday terms. When someone makes a sweeping analogy like, "This company is collapsing just like the Titanic," a legally trained mind pushes back. Actually, what data proves we're sinking, and how is this situation similar in measurable terms? That shift forces clarity, moving people away from panic and toward reality. Crockett did this exact thing over and over until vague rhetoric lost power completely. The larger lesson? Your professional background can be a hidden asset in unexpected places. Skills that feel routine in one field, like cross-examination in law, become devastatingly effective when applied elsewhere. Crockett's legal reflexes gave her composure, precision, and adaptability, and those traits proved decisive. Takeaway: build on your expertise. What you practice daily may one day become your sharpest debating blade. One of the most underestimated aspects of a political debate is that it isn't fought on a single battlefield. There's the chamber itself, where the immediate audience is other lawmakers, and then there's the digital arena, where clips and sound bites spread at lightning speed. Jasmine Crockett managed to win on both simultaneously, something few politicians pull off. 2 fronts, 1 win. Inside the chamber, Crockett's reliance on verifiable facts gave her an advantage with colleagues. Lawmakers are not immune to rhetoric, but they are far more persuaded by arguments that align with legislative numbers and actual votes. Crockett's corrections and references to budget reports signaled to her peers that she wasn't just grandstanding, she was doing the hard work of governing. That credibility pays dividends when alliances are formed and bills negotiated. But outside those walls, something else happened. Clips of Crockett calmly dismantling Omar's arguments rocketed across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Hashtags popped up, memes were made, and the narrative quickly solidified. Crockett had destroyed Omar, not with insults, but with receipts. Young audiences especially gravitated to this, praising the way fact-first rhetoric felt refreshing compared to typical soundbite politics. Within hours, Crockett had expanded her influence far beyond D.C. It's rare to score this kind of dual victory. Many leaders impress their colleagues but bore the internet. Others go viral online but alienate legislative power brokers. Crockett threaded the needle, boosting her standing in Congress while energizing her broader brand with voters and activists. The lesson here stretches beyond politics. Whenever you're presenting ideas, think multi-platform. How will it play in the room, and how will it play once it leaves the room? Crockett proved that mastering both spheres is how modern leaders cement influence. Sometimes an exchange between 2 politicians is more than just a snapshot of the present. It's a trailer for what's coming next. That's exactly what many analysts saw in the Crockett-Omar clash. Beneath the jabs, corrections, and rhetorical framing was a deeper storyline. Which style will dominate future Democratic primaries? Will it be the slogan-heavy, emotion-driven approach or the detail-oriented, fact-first brand Crockett exemplified? The battle defines the future. The stakes here are bigger than a single exchange. Campaigns are increasingly split between 2 schools. One thrives on viral energy, soaring speeches, eye-catching lines, and grassroots electricity. The other prioritizes policy fluency, documentation, and long-game credibility with party insiders. Historically, passion candidates have grabbed attention early, but policy-grounded candidates have stacked more lasting wins. What the Crockett moment reveals is that the next wave of challengers may not need to choose, they may blend. Imagine the impact in upcoming primaries if more candidates embrace Crockett's model of marrying conviction with concrete figures. Voters energized by values still get the moral clarity they crave, while skeptics demanding proof see a path to trust. That hybrid approach could reshape debates, making it harder for rhetorical heavyweights like Omar to dominate without also backing every line with evidence. For younger progressives aspiring to run for office, the message is clear. The age of slogans unmoored from data may be fading. To compete in a crowded field, you must pull receipts, cite budgets, and anticipate fact checks. Takeaway: elections are increasingly decided not by who shouts loudest, but by who balances passion and proof. Crockett didn't just win that night. She may have previewed the blueprint for a new kind of progressive contender, one whose arguments not only inspire, but also endure. There's nothing more damaging in a high-stakes debate than citing numbers that are no longer true. That's the pitfall Ilhan Omar stepped into when she leaned on figures that had already been updated by newer reports. It might have seemed like a minor slip. Policy budgets and aid numbers often change year to year, but in the hands of an opponent like Jasmine Crockett, it became devastating. Old data sinks fast. Crockett immediately pounced with trade. Mark calm, she pointed out that Omar's statistics were outdated, referencing the latest Congressional Budget Office reports to fill in the corrections. That one move didn't just erase Omar's argument in the moment, it undercut her credibility for the rest of the exchange. If your numbers are stale, how can your conclusions stand? Crockett didn't need to raise her voice. Recency carried all the weight. This is a classic debate dynamic. Audiences may not remember the intricate policy details, but they absolutely remember who looked current and who looked out of step. It's the difference between citing last quarter's earnings in a boardroom versus citing yesterday's numbers. The fresher data always commands the room because it feels connected to reality in a way the older figures don't. For anyone engaging in persuasion, whether politics, business, or academia, the takeaway is clear. Your information is only as strong as its timestamp. In the digital age, facts age faster than ever. What looks solid today may look flimsy tomorrow. Crockett's quick correction highlighted why serious preparation matters. You can't just memorize talking points, you must stay updated to the minute. In debates, outdated data doesn't just weaken one argument. It lingers. It plants doubt in everything else you say. Crockett weaponized that truth, and the result was credibility collapse. Sometimes the most telling part of a showdown doesn't happen under the bright lights. It happens backstage. After the Crockett-Omar clash, accounts began emerging from staffers and reporters about what unfolded in the aftermath. Omar's aides, according to insiders, scrambled to clarify, reframe, and defend her talking points. Media briefings became less about amplifying her core message and more about damage control. What she really meant was, or her figures were drawn from earlier reports. The fact that so much time had to be spent explaining already signaled a loss of momentum. When you're clarifying, you're not convincing. Meanwhile, Crockett's camp had a much simpler job. They didn't need spin. They didn't need to reinterpret her words. All they did was circulate clips, raw video of Crockett calmly dismantling Omar's arguments using receipts. No embellishment required, and those clips did the work for them, spreading rapidly across news feeds and timelines, generating their own headlines like "Crockett fact-checks Omar in real time." The contrast between scrambling and showcasing could not have been sharper. That behind-the-scenes mini-drama revealed something important about modern persuasion. The strongest arguments don't require translation. If your team has to constantly explain, patch, or repackage your words, you've probably already lost the perception battle. Crockett's statements stood on their own. Omar's needed footnotes. Think about your own life. Ever make a point in a meeting that colleagues instantly nod to, while someone else's point prompts endless follow-ups and explanations? The one that sticks is the one that doesn't require rescue. Takeaway. The debate doesn't end when the microphone's cut off. It continues in the retelling, in the headlines, in the social media shares. Strength is when your words carry themselves without an army of aides to hold them up. Political scholars often argue that each era produces its own signature style of persuasion. The 1960s were about soaring moral rhetoric. The 1990s leaned heavily into triangulation and centrist framing. Today, a new style may be emerging, and Jasmine Crockett's exchange with Ilhan Omar put it on full display. Fact clashing. Method spreads fast. Fact clashing isn't about trading insults or emotional appeals. It's about weaponizing accuracy, turning debates into a duel over whose data is freshest, whose sources are most credible, whose numbers can withstand direct scrutiny. Crockett embodied this perfectly, backing Evers' response with records, floor votes, and hard statistics. Omar, leaning more on passion and repetition, found herself overwhelmed not because her values were weak, but because her facts weren't fortified. Experts observing the debate noted that this style is gaining traction among younger lawmakers and activists. Unlike previous generations, who often leaned on anecdotal storytelling, the digital age rewards immediacy and verifiability. Anyone watching a debate can fact-check in real time with a smartphone. That means outdated claims collapse faster than ever, and precise data rises higher than emotion. We've seen hints of this shift before. Policy-driven candidates who release detailed plans online have often enjoyed credibility boosts even if they don't always win elections. But Crockett's performance showed how fact-clashing works in live combat. It isn't just about policy papers, it's about deploying those facts in the heat of rebuttal. Here's the broader lesson. As debate culture evolves, the most effective communicators will be those who can marry passion with instant defensible proof. If activists and politicians alike adopt this style, we may be looking at a transformation in how progressive politics is practiced. In the future, receipts won't be optional. They'll be the battlefield itself. At the end of the day, the clash between Jasmine Crockett and Ilhan Omar wasn't just political theater. It was a reminder of how all of us can handle disagreements in our own lives. Whether it's in politics, business, or even at the dinner table, the principle holds true. Arguments without proof are fragile, but evidence-backed reasoning endures. Facts first, always. For many viewers, especially young activists or students still shaping their communication style, Crockett showed why leaning on slogans or rehearsed lines isn't enough. Sure, emotion may win applause, but the applause fades quickly when your claims collapse under scrutiny. By contrast, when your case is supported by verifiable facts, whether it's statistics, records, or detailed examples, your argument doesn't just hold in the moment, it echoes long after. Think about those moments we all face: persuading a boss to approve a project, negotiating terms in a partnership, or even settling disagreements among friends. If you only appeal to emotion, "This is unfair," or "We need this desperately," you put yourself at the mercy of how others feel. But if you bring receipts, hard numbers, documented agreements, credible resources, you shift the debate from emotion to certainty. And certainty brings confidence. The Crockett-Omar moment distilled a truth we often forget. Persuasion isn't only about who talks loudest or most passionately, it's about who leaves behind the firmest ground. Crockett walked away with more credibility simply because she proved her points with evidence. The takeaway for you? Never enter a debate, big or small, without facts in your corner. Emotions may ignite passion, but facts sustain conviction. If you want your arguments to stand, make them unshakable, make them verifiable, because in any arena, the strongest voice is the one grounded in truth. So what did this duel really teach us? That passion alone may spark attention, but only precision creates momentum. Jasmine Crockett's method wasn't explosive or theatrical. It was surgical, persistent, and undeniable. And that's why it left such an impression. The victory came not from louder words, but from stronger proof. This exchange marked more than just a clash of two representatives. It was a snapshot of where politics could be headed. If rhetoric-heavy arguments continue to falter against data-grounded rebuttals, expect a shift in how candidates craft their campaigns, how activists organize their strategies, and how debates play out both online and offline. The age of slogans may be giving way to the age of receipts. For you, the viewer, the broader takeaway is timeless. In any heated situation, emotions set the tempo, but facts decide the outcome. Whether it's in politics, business, or your personal world, credibility is the ultimate currency. Crockett earned it by proving her case with documentation, clarity, and composure. And that's why this clash will be remembered not just as a dramatic moment in Congress, but as a signal. A signal that future debates may be won not by force of passion, but by command of truth. Stay tuned, because in our next deep dive, we'll explore how fact-first persuasion is quietly reshaping not just arguments, but actual legislation, changing the way policies come to life.